So there was a time before 321 BCE that there was the last of the Nanda kings. King Dhanananda was a very corrupt and evil ruler. He was very apprehensive. There was a person named Chanakya, or you must have known him for Kautilya or Vishnugupta, and he had a personal grudge against King Dhanananda. And he was a scholar, economist, and he also authored the Arthashastra, the book of Arthashastra. That's why he's known as the pioneer in the field of politics. And he's going to be very vital in what we're going to talk about today. So I'm talking about the last of the Nanda dynasty. Yes, King Dhananand, who was overthrown by Chandragupta Maurya, who was assisted by Chanakya, what we are talking about right now. And how did this happen? So today we're going to be talking about the Mauryan period. Yep, the Mauryan dynasty. So it was once upon a time where he and Chanakya were in the court, and the king was disrespecting Chanakya for being such a bad scholar, as he was trying to make the country better, and that's why he had a grudge against him. Also, earlier, his father, Chanakya's father or Kautilya's father, he actually got decapitated by the fault of King Dhananand and by his soldiers. And one evening, Chanakya as a kid went to his father's head on top of a tree at his home, and he swore that he would take revenge against Dhananand. He wasn't a king himself. He needed to rally up his own army, but not only him. He had to rally someone who would get the army, and that's where we get Chandragupta Maurya. At that time, he was not even in the royal family or any priest or anything, not some kid of a priest, nothing special, but he was very special in Chanakya's eyes. He was sitting under a tree. Yeah, Chandragupta was sitting under a tree with his friends, and he was playing as a king coincidentally. Chanakya saw how special this kid was, and he came as someone who wanted 10 cows. He asked Chandragupta this question, "May I take one cow, please?" And Chandragupta said, "No one will discredit your authority of taking one of my cows. Please go and take one for your home." Chanakya asked, "What if someone would authorize me or discredit me?" So Chandragupta said, "No one will discredit you in my kingdom." Seeing this, Chanakya was very impressed. So he went to his mother and told her that, "Hey, I want to teach this kid. He seems very special." And the mother, of course, agreed. So for the next several years, Chanakya taught Chandragupta of every law, every economics thing, every subject, mathematician, astrology, astronomy, and mainly law. So they rallied up their own army, people, men from other provinces, men who were upset, and they decided, let's attack Patliputra, which was the capital of that time. But they did not succeed because it is the most highly guarded place at that time. So they disguised themselves and sneakily went into a house. And you know what they saw? Their own problem. So there was a mother and a child, and the child was trying to drink soup from the hot and center parts of the soup. But the mom said, "Don't be so naive like Chandragupta and Chanakya or make-believe stuff. Drink from the colder parts of the content, and soon when everything else gets colder, you drink from there." And then they realized their mistake. They started working around the clock and coming to the center. And their empire started growing, expanding. They even captured two of the most important cities, Takshila and Ujjain, which we'll talk about later. Now, they finally overthrew Dhananand when reaching the center, and thus this became the Mauryan dynasty. Not empire, right, yet. As they started growing, it finally became an empire right now. And then, let me tell you about where it extended from. So, at a young age of below 20 years, Chandragupta had established a vast empire, expanding from Hindu Kush in the northwest to Bengal in the east, or actually Brahmaputra in the east, from Himalayas in the north to Narmada in the south. So a lot of things were, and it's almost all of India, except one spot, Kaling. It was all covered and just joined together, and amazingly enough, they could handle it with two people, Chanakya and Chandragupta. Now, let's talk about Chandragupta's son, Bindusara. Bindusara and Chandragupta who had chief advisors Chanakya. Yes, Chanakya, who taught them to fight, who taught them to do everything, taught them law, taught them politics, taught them economics and whatnot. Then, as Bindusara grew up, he actually had many wives. By then, he had taken the crown, and Chandragupta had gone never to be seen again as a Jain monk, and I guess Chanakya died. His favorite son was the oldest son, Sushim, and they had also a kid named Ashoka. Yes, Ashoka the Great, we all say that. And he always saw that his father never liked him. But Bindusara, yeah, and that was true. Bindusara always thought that Sushim would always be coronated king. But many people never saw him fit to do that. However, Ashok, on the other hand, he was on a path of righteousness and he was actually serious with his work, and many people loved him. The ministers had finally found their king. Now, one day old Bindusar fell very sick and he said, "Call Sushim." But they said that Sushim was still in Takshala. And then he said, "Where's Ashok?" So they said that Ashok was still in the palace, but he was not fit to be outside or anywhere else. You know why? Because they had covered Ashok in a layer of turmeric to make him look pale. And they covered juices all around him, and just that made him look very sick. So when the king saw him, he was like, "Okay, let me get well soon." But then days after days after days, or actually 2 days later, old Bindusar was on the verge to death and he was on bed rest. So they said, "Where is Sushim?" And they said, "He's still in Takshila." But he got very, very, very angry. "Call Sushim now." So what they did? They got Ashok all dressed in jewelry and everything like that. Not in disguise though. And he said when he came here, "Samrat, your son is here." Ashok said himself. And Bindusar said, "You traitors!" He reached to grab a sword, but fell down. And he died. Ashok, having the crown, was coronated as king, and thus they lived happily ever after. But now the story doesn't end, you know that. When Sushim got to know about this, he got so angry. He rallied all his brothers, all the men, all the soldiers, and went into the battlefield to fight Ashok. Ashok had an idea all along, of course. Ashok had made wooden floors, or at least what I've heard, on the floor, and whenever the Sushim and his army would step onto it, they would fall to their death, fall into fire, fall into everything else. And thus, he did not have to do any fighting. And he had eliminated almost half his soldiers. Now, how do we come to know about this Mauryan Empire? Because there are two literary sources, or two sources called literary source and archaeological source. Archaeological source like paintings, artifacts, punchmark copper and gold coins and silver coins like that. And the other source is like the literary source like Kautilya's Arthashtra, Vishaka Datta's Mudra Rakshasa, Megasthenes' Indica, and Buddhist literature and Puranas. So all of these are listed and we get to know about these sources. Well, it's just me, and this is a library, so I have to say goodbye. Shh.